But we're very pleased to welcome to Trinity Laura Aking of University of Hartford, Julia Bergdorf of Connecticut College, Tori Sheldon of Albertus Magnus College, and James Ciano of Trinity College. Really? That's the bad? Come on. That's better. So there's a pamphlet with a little bio on each poet and one of their poems put together by our fabulous administrator, Christina Bolio, who's filming down the back. Thank you, Christina. So if you'd like a memento of the event or a picture of James to hang up on your bedroom wall, you should take one of those. The roasting will stop now, James. So the poets are going to introduce each other. I will introduce the first poet, who is going to be Tori from Albertus Magnus College. Tori Sheldon just completed her studies at Albertus Magnus, where she majored in English creative writing. Her work has appeared in Breakwater, the AMC literary magazine. Tori remains active on campus, singing in the choir, serving on the 2014 Breakwater Committee, and tutoring at the AMC Writing Center. Working with the students there has inspired her to pursue graduate studies in composition and rhetoric in the hopes of becoming a college professor. She plans to retire someday to Arizona with some pets and a good telescope. Please welcome all of our poets, but please welcome first Tori Sheldon.
Thank you very much. Okay, hopefully that doesn't fall. So, first off, I'm really, really excited to be here. And when I was chosen, I was really I'm very overwhelmed. I was really so honored to be chosen by my college to represent us for the Connecticut Poetry Circuit. Especially, wow, sorry. When I write my poetry, I try to pay a lot of attention because my poetry teacher, Dr. Susan Cole, told me that attention is an act of love. That when you pay attention to something, you see it in a way that other people truly don't. And that poetry can be an act of looking closely, that you can really learn so much about something as you write about it. And even when I write about fiction, I try to ground everything in really close observation. So as I read my poetry, I'm trying to capture things both as I see them and to convey to you the way that I see them. And that's really what inspired me and why I was so honored to be chosen, because I felt like my vision then had really come across. So in my first poem, it's a poem in 3 parts at this time, but it's a poem that will never truly be finished because it's a poem about a character of mine. His name is Ajax. And with Ajax, he's sort of an exercise in observation. He has very unique body language, and I've tried to develop him to feel like a real person. In my mind, he's very vivid. He moves in a certain way. So when I wrote this poem, the various parts of it, I really wanted it to convey him as a physical entity. And it grows as he grows. Right now it's in 3 parts. It's called Demystification. 1. 30 years have made him quiet. He smiles often, a small distraction that fails to mask the pauses when he speaks, the hesitance in his step, the deliberation of his touch. 30 years have made him quiet with all their small dissatisfactions, the disappointments of a life deferred. But he smiles, and to others his presence brings palpable but not unpleasant weight, a heavy wool blanket on a chill night. 2. The trick is not to look at his mouth. Watch his eyes, watch for crinkles at the corners. His brow furrows when you have his full attention, accordion folds ridging that patrician nose. His shoulders shift and roll with casual indecision, his body trailing behind, reluctant. Notice how he hunches over, forever sheltering some fragile thing. Don't look at his mouth, at the small, soft, endless smiles, unless you see how the corner tugs upward like a marionette's arm. 3. He laughs like glass shattering on the kitchen floor. His body buckles, breaks into so many pieces, sound crashing out of his cracked open face, skittering across the linoleum tile. His life is leaking out of him like air from a balloon, the slow hiss hidden by the sputter. So my next poem is much simpler. It's a poem about a color. It was actually written for a prompt in class, and we had to select a color and try to describe it as best as we could without necessarily referring to the color directly, which I ended up doing. I tried to draw on personal associations I have with my color, black. Obviously, black has a lot of negative associations, has a lot of associations with depression. But for me, because I was formerly an art student, I had this obsession with creating black, because one of my teachers had banned me from actually using the color itself. We had to make it. It was a pain. But ever since then, I've been kind of incapable of using my black colored pencils, and I think I'm better for it. So this poem is called Bottom Sunk. Once she hulled in the abyss, sorrowed with octopus ink amid sunken opium clippers. Moored in the endless black, she clung mussel-like to those shadowed sands, fearing the unknown shore. But in the prism of the water, she could see the darkness separate, its shadows wood-red and crisp apple-green, darkened by rich blues and plum purples. And when the time came, she was almost sad to leave. The next set of, I guess it's a set of poems. It's excerpts from a long series of short verses that I'm writing called Flotsam. It's a work that I half finished about a year ago, and I'm currently rehauling it. These are some excerpts, 4 excerpts, that are probably going to stay in the final version that I'm still really pleased with. It's a good opportunity to take it. It's supposed to be about 2 shattered people who are trying to help each other piece each other back together. But for now, it probably doesn't look very much like that. So this is 4 excerpts from Flotsam. 2. Her childhood was all swing-set chains and steel pipe. Her father masked down, welding scrap metal sculpture. Sparks flying in the shell of their old garage as he forged a life for them alone. 3. The garage decayed, the floor sun-bleached and the walls blackened around the charred, collapsed maw that was once a roof. Her sole inheritance, a shambles of driftwood in the semblance of a house, standing staggered on the beach. She stood on the sagging porch and did not cry. 6. His mind is a machine well-oiled, eyes engine efficient in stripping her to bare broken parts. His fingers twitch, and she hates how those painstaking hands itch to fix her. 9. Her home is frail and sickly, spindly legs splayed into the sand, the porch cringing, paint crying down the ashen boards. Hand-me-down dressers with drawers that don't open, a stove steadily rusting beyond recognition. These are what she has to offer. He skims his fingertips over the railing. Familiarity settles on him like a shroud, and she swears she can see the gears turning. So, my last 2 poems are personal poems, and I picked them because I think they kind of chart my development. The first is a much older poem that was about sort of my writing process. I have this habit of writing down little scraps of poetry on anything I can find and then throwing them in a pile on my desk. And I always seem to just stumble on the right scrap of paper exactly when I need it. So this poem ended up being composed of lots of those little scraps, and it has a dreamy sort of quality, even though it's very short. Creation. She carves them from those liminal hours when the light's peony yellow fingers grip the horizon. Statues of soapstone and soft metals, malleable and easily ink-stained. For her they rustle in tree leaves, red-breasted and bushy-tailed, or lurk in the shadows of back-alley dumpsters, ash-clouded. She constellates them in the popcorn of her ceiling, talcum stars dusting her Arizona sky. And for my last poem, you may have already read it. This is one of my most recent poems and one of my favorites. It is about a word that I absolutely love and am notorious for weaseling into conversation where it really does not belong. But I was told that there's nothing superfluous about this poem, and I think that characterizes the way my style has developed, how it's kind of pared back to just being about what I see and what I observe. So, without further ado, superfluous. A subtle start. The pop of that punctuating stress purred out. A flick of the tongue as fulsome vowels roll off in their roundness, and it goes, soft as it started, bookended by sweet, sibilant nothings. It begs to be spoken, but demands to be cut, by definition excess. But so much in life seems non-essential. Front porches, flower gardens, pet fish, breakfast nooks, in all important aspects identical to an Eton kitchen, and yet somehow more. Thank you. So, our next student poet is Julia Bergdorf from Connecticut College. She is a senior graduating in December 2014, where she is majoring in philosophy and English. Julia has worked in the Office of Columbia University's Summer Creative Writing Program for high school students since 2010. She interned for 826 NYC from January to June 2012 and for Gigantic Magazine based in Brooklyn from 2010 to 2012. Julia.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. My first poem is one of many poems I write that features my dog, Henry. It's called Past Midnight in New Hampshire. Henry, where do you roam in your dreaming yips and twitching? We come outside to find stillness where there is no stillness. Grand incineration and all that. Someone's voice in the wind through the screen door. I could throw my hands up in the air, but then there I am, hands in the air, in the dark. In the dark, you become an absence for a moment. And loons out here. I could swim out towards their cry, into the black lake where wide-eyed fish roam, geometry of vessels and cold blood, and disperse, if only. How far until the door shuts behind me? Forgive me, Henry, later I will wake, throwing myself against a wall, and you will think there's some danger and we're trapped. So I was raised in a religion that was founded in the same time as the Transcendentalist movement in Concord, Massachusetts, around the 1860s. And one of their core beliefs is that reality is not what we believe it to be, and that the material world is actually kind of a dream, which is heavy stuff to be raised believing. And so this poem is kind of about that idea. The Axe of Gilgamesh. The undertaker bites the toe, and there's no yelp. What does it mean to constantly dream of tornadoes, if not in Kansas? To be born under a waxing moon. Gilgamesh threw the axe at his mother, embraced it like a wife. It would not forsake him. Lulled by illusions, the world sleeps, dreams of everything. Empty beehives, martyrs, spit. To be immersed in water means baptism, means death. They come to the door with that look on their face, the end of the world. Without the empty space and matter, the human race would fit in a sugar cube. Instead, we are dissolved into the world. If this is the dream we'll one day wake from, we only want to be let in on the joke. So I'm going to do a couple of shorter poems. This one is called Destroy to Save. My father sits like one of the chicks in their egg rooms, mumbling under lamplight. In the tackle box, he keeps an army-issue revolver, rusty nails, the names he knows but does not speak. In the pond with the somnolent fish, the shivering webs of light seem always out of reach until the muck-rooted branches scratch my eyelids and cheeks, and I rise, holding my face in my hands. And this next one is about my brother-in-law lives way up north in Vermont, and one of his hobbies is going out and collecting animal bones in the woods. He's an interesting guy. And he brought back this deer skull with the antlers still on and the teeth still there, and it just looked like this estranged creature in his house. He has this room with all of them. It's unsettling. So this poem is called Returning. We searched for animal bones in the northern woods, where deer are buried in once flushed leaves and snow, where even in the snow you found a pair of antlers still bound to their skull, teeth loose in the jaw. And later, in the evening, when the storm prevailed over the weak-jointed power lines, you stuck candles in the cavities of its eyes, illuminating the room, the impious arrangement of orphaned bones. As we sleep, it drifts through the house, crying wax and searching for its kind. So this next poem is about my brother, who I will tell him a story, and he will repeat what I'm saying back to me as if he's following along, but what he's saying is completely insane and twisted, just to be obnoxious. And so I say, like, I said I went to the bookstore, but I felt kind of sick to my stomach. And he said, oh, okay, so, like, the bookstore was in your stomach, and, like, went on from that. And so this poem kind of took that impulse. It's called In Which Your Bruises Bloom. Where were you? Looking for that book. Yes, you walked into your boyfriend's mouth and clambered down his lungs to look at the books. Or were those sleeping bats that stirred when his cough rumbled, shook dust from the rafters? No, walking to the library through gates like the rusty teeth of your boyfriend's dog, who in late summer naps by the barn for days, migrating with the sun like a shadow, as big as a grizzly with a belly full of fish swimming, fish napping in elm shade, fish glossy and washed up, dead on riverbanks, in a book about chemical spills, or frantic and bumping into stomach walls like carnival fish inside a balloon, staring out into the rickety stands, selling paper windmills and honeycomb soaked in honey. You can't find the animals carved out of wood, but maybe you're thinking of Illinois years ago. In the fish water, a muted voice says the plums aren't ripe, then plums falling like meteors from your arm's crook, back into the crate, one pocketed after a glance. And this last poem also features my dog. And at our house in New Hampshire, we live on a lake, and we live on a cove, and across the cove is this house that's kind of enshrouded in woods, and I've never met the people who live there, but it's always fascinated me my entire life. And one day I went over and poked around and wasn't caught, thankfully. Yeah. Answer. In this way, as when winter's near, and Henry and I follow the dirt road along its curve through woods to the empty house across the cove. A boat drifts and bobs, resigned to ancient rope. The porch paint is cracking. Henry's breath fogs a window. Inside, in dusty last light, stairs that curve out of sight to imagined bedrooms. The wind moves through us as it moves through the trees, evergreens like kings filled with blackbirds. We look back on our house like strangers. The spell, desire lines leading to the water. The spell is nothing if I say it's nothing, is nothing. Hear Henry, leaves rustling, twigs cracking. Hear him prowl. I know I can't stay for long, but is it always true? Is it always? I try to remember. That's the end. The next poet who we'll be reading is Laura Ocking. She's a junior at the University of Hartford. She's majoring in English and creative writing. but she began her studies at the Museum of Fine Arts, and also Tufts University as an animated filmmaker and philosophy student. Laura has been a devoted journal writer since she was very young. She has a pet rat named Vita, and sometimes collects cacti. She has an array of bizarre, useless objects from junk stores, and her most treasured possession is a collection of art manifestos written by the painter Agnes Martin, which is pretty cool.
Hi. My first poem is about the process of collecting and the associations of place and self juxtaposed with the collected object. Matchbooks. I held those dirty things in a bedroom that's no longer mine, put them into categories such as books with half the matches, plucked grins with missing teeth. Empty books went in their own box, in the sterling sets of pink tips, straight like picket fences, stood out in their small number, rare collectibles. In some, the flap had been brutally ripped off, battered, found in the most wicked back alleys, pocketed, discarded, or used to set themselves on fire. They were scorched and brittle with delicate edges. One had narrowly missed the gutter. Its flap hung like a tent over the metal grate. On the bridges and public buses that once welcomed me, in sidewalk cracks and metal seats, I stuffed them dry and dirty, and they bulged in my pockets. I let them overflow like arcade game gold. The best were picked up after rain. The dye in the pink heads bled on the white backdrop, melting lollipops. On the musty pavement, the matchbooks rose with the steam, floated in my head like thoughts that no longer seemed my own. This next poem is about a trip that I took with a friend, but what it's really about is watching someone who is taking photographs. Virginia Beach in winter. In diluted sun, you and I got out of the car, shore empty, hands in our coats. Twisted winds off the water, just warm enough to kick off our shoes and pulse sharp sand through our wormy, lint-covered toes. Unbathed, mouths unbrushed and dry, we peered into closed seasonal surf shops and a beach-themed bar. I watched you take a photograph on film of its green-painted door, peeling, unattended until summer. You snapped the vast sand, uninterrupted by a stranger's silhouette or mine. I stood watching you choose portrait or landscape, twisting dials and knobs with your mittened thumb. The seagulls in the waves were the only motion I thought you wanted to catch, but I don't know what dances through your shutter. Waters yawning as the sun lowered, you rolled your pants and stepped to your ankles to catch a hunk of driftwood in a picture you would later print and mail to me. This time, I drove us slowly below the speed limit at first. I thought I'd miss this place. Soon the interstates became familiar. You watched the road through your viewfinder. I watched the road and remembered where we were. This next poem is about wanting to make deliberate interactions with intangible things. It's called catching. Even as I move towards it, through it, I don't know if I can touch the space in front of my nose. It backs away, like a flock of blackbirds in the park, dispersing when feeling the vibration of a single footstep. I will never catch the air I want. I've picked a patch, shaped it, entrailed its all-over crawl. It will go where my eye won't, so I squint at the particles landing between my head and hand when I hold my palm an inch away from the tip of my face. The barrier that is my body observes what touches below the raised hair on my arm. Each needle-pointed piece dances like limber fingers on a grand piano. I know I have felt these pricks of air before. If I could capture one, I'd put it in my mouth, swallow it whole, but not before kicking it around with my tongue to know the texture, weight, and taste of a particle that before I only knew when I stared inside a glass mason jar. This poem has a very simple introduction. It's about closing my eyes. Shut. Mix of flesh and fire, inner orb whose color I try to name. Skin wrapped around eyeballs, cuts like film pulled from a projector. In the light, burning through the outer lid, an ant twitching under a magnifying glass. When I see the sun, golden but impossibly scarlet, when I deepen into two crescent flaps of skin, the lucent swords bluntly cut. This next poem dissects the process of coming to know that it's raining. From the back porch. Then the static sounds on the soaring piece of roof, a vinyl slab drowned in drips. I cannot see the needles, but I hear them prick, dangle, I think, on the curved side of the awning, then flatten and slide. They fall too quick and thin to pick out against the pieces of textured landscape. I do not see the rain. I think it's surrounding on every side but two. My cigarette smoke and I, dry as the dead cactus. A leak in the roof drips on the back of my neck, so I bend it into a sailing bridge. My last poem is about not only the association of memory with sense, but how memory is a kind of other sense. And it's called Whole Coffee Bean. It crisped willingly in my tombstone teeth, coated my pink mouth with dry bitterness, flaked on my tongue, stuck to it like wind-blown pine needles cling to a wet window. The grind got caught in my tooth and buds, gnarled between crooked molars, textured tongue. Sometimes I think I smell whole coffee beans in the closeness of my car. On second whiff, cigarettes. I found a whole coffee bean in the pocket of my winter coat, stale but not cracked. Its aroma faint but sticking, illuminating my cave of mind, soaking itself like oil on eggplant. Yet the whole coffee bean in my hand was scentless. Like when I thought I smelled your saliva on my arm, maybe it was there, or not. I didn't smell through my nose. Thank you. And our final poet is James Ciano from here, Trinity College. James Ciano is a senior at Trinity College where he is majoring in English, creative writing, and minoring in African studies. At Trinity, he has received the Fred Paffiel Memorial Prize in Creative Writing, the Alumnus Prize in Prose Fiction, and the Best Screenplay Award at the Trinity Film Festival. He was a state finalist in the 2009 Poetry Out Loud contest. James' poetry has appeared in Prairie Magazine and Slate Magazine. James is not only a poet, but an athlete, playing on Trinity's men's soccer team. He plans to pursue an MFA in poetry. Thank you.
Quick thanks to everyone for coming out. It's a pleasure. So, this first poem comes out of a generative exercise that we had done last fall in my senior seminar. Was given a sheet of newspaper headlines and given the task, pick which one interests you most and reimagine the article and what's happened. So this is called Boy Dies Falling Down Well. Maybe he clipped the blind bat's black wing on the way down before bursting open the layer of bird shit and algae bloom caked on the water's surface. Or maybe there was no splash, the well dried up, the dirt at the bottom dehydrated, the water having given up on itself. I remember the fountain, my hands, tossing coins against the air, the ripple widening on the surface, the wish at the bottom of the water. Is this how you kill a coin? Drowning pennies at the bottom of a well. Maybe the boy stopped believing in wishes, wanted to excavate the change like coal from a mine. Don't we all stop believing in the things we once thought were real? Sometimes I look at the stars and think of how I need to unscrew them from the ceiling of the night. Regardless of what I know, when the wind blows against my face this hard enough that my eyes become miniature lakes, I know someone somewhere has made the candles on the cake go quiet in a whisper. So I had an awful experience at a pub trivia night over the summer. Got way too drunk and tried to come home and sleep immediately. And so this poem actually came out of that, and it's called Sleeping Drunk. And it takes this idea of things spinning and kind of swells it out, first starting with the drunkenness and then into kind of memories of different things actually spinning. So it moves from the drunk to kind of the world as a whole. So, Sleeping Drunk. Lying on this bed, soaked and sunken in sheets of cotton and sweat, the fan overhead carves fractions out of the air, its 3 old and wooden wings cracked through the white paint, dead skin peeling. This blood, hot lava, a train derailing in the tunnel of the vein, these organs seeped in whiskey and gin, lungs split in half like a wishbone, this life, this body centrifugal. I remember the drawing by Da Vinci of the naked man in the circle, the body, my body, naked in the darkness, the 90-degree night, the carousel at the circle park they trapped me on as a child, and the globe I played within my brother's room, my index finger running over mountain peaks and reef bottoms, miles of sand and tree shade before lifting back up into this world, which I know at this moment is spinning on its axis with no AC and the car alarm blaring at the end of the block, back to this bed, this body, the whole frame revolving around itself, back to all those childish souls outside my window who must be spinning the earth round like a top. This next piece comes out of a moment with my grandfather. I had returned home in the fall. My grandparents moved to Florida when I was a kid, and in the past few years his health has been slowly deteriorating, and they'd come up for a visit in the fall, and with the knowledge that it may be the last time I got to saw him, I made the trip home, and the poem kind of bridges this moment where I walk in the door and he doesn't quite recognize me as his grandson. It also kind of interweaves. He's a World War II veteran, Purple Heart recipient, but something he refuses to talk about and has never spoken about with myself, my brothers, my family at all. So it takes this moment and interweaves this not knowing of myself from his perspective to me not knowing this kind of past of his. It's called recognition. The language of not knowing is silence. We spoke to each other with our open mouths closed. Your eyes, old and alabaster, stared at me, no, right through me, and out at the back of the skull, this body, a window. What was it you saw or didn't see in that moment? A boy, yourself as a boy, or did I become the German soldier gunned down by the bullet galloped out of the barrel? The gun, the grease, your hand quivering like a heart loud enough to shake the leaves from their trees in Huertgun. And you here in the kitchen, standing like a tree, leafless, just bare branch and limb, stencil and outline, bones without marrow. I blame time for the dulling of all things, like your memory, which I imagine is as sharp as the edgeless knife you used to pry the shrapnel from your shoulder in the Ardennes. The silence holds us now like the seconds before the grenade burst in Bastogne, the one which sent the tree bark shavings out like shattered glass. In this moment, you're the grenade, I'm the pin. What we once knew of each other hangs in the unspeakable space between us before it settles back out again like smoke. This next piece comes out of, again, the senior seminar workshop from last fall. And we had read two collections. We've read more than two collections, but in two particular collections, David Ferry's Bewilderment and Tracy K. Smith's Life on Mars. Each poet has a poem that explores this notion of the soul and tries to ground that intangible abstraction in tangible objects and realities. So this was my attempt to follow in their footsteps. It's called The Soul. Oil to the skeleton machine. I hear you when the train squeals like a sad dog, when the bones bang together xylophonic. I want to pry you open like a clam, these fingers each a different type of crowbar, meaning each a different type of longing. You are the pitted pearl living inside the Hulk Hogan lunchbox under the bed. You are the closed door's rattling frame, the lock that makes the jangling keys go silent on their chains. You are the shrinking space in between the monkey brain's symboled fists. You live in all the small spaces I can't fit. A pile of leaves spun around the patio like sink water, and I knew it was you. You're the father to the heart that left and never came back. When my joints crack, I know it's just the last echo of your laugh. Sometimes you whisper, hello, hello, through the small and unspeakable crack in the window. Sometimes you say everything by saying nothing at all. This is the last poem I have for this afternoon. It starts with a cup of coffee, and it really kind of meditates on the shape of a circle, and takes these strands and sends them out and pulls them back in again towards the end. It's called Radii. Also, I should mention there's a reference to a line of a poem in here from Tracy K. Smith. Radii. The coffee cup leaves circles on the table, then diagrams the wood into several small and blackened pairs of eyes. And what more are eyes than two welcome mats to the body? Two mats with phrases like, come in and take off your shoes. At our home, there's a rusted shovel sitting on the cracked cement stoop. A family of cigarette butts huddles at the bottom of a watering pot, next to the garden of crabgrass and petrified dirt. My coffee is dense and opaque. The longer I stare into the black, the quicker the tears coagulate on my eyes. Back to my eyes, this body, every room, every bed, every desk, drawer, and closet full. If you unhinge the door to the ribs, you'd find the formula for circumference, or maybe a memory, the first tire spinning on the first bike. Tacked to the board of my chest is a map of the earth. Stored in the deepest chasm of my sternum is the time you spiked the bottle on the kitchen floor like a football. The pieces of glass shattered outwards in varying radii. This poem that I'm reading tells me everything that ever was still is, waiting to come back again. What more then is a circle except a line that loves itself? Thank you.